Hello YouTube! Today we will be taking a look at this Walkman, which is the same size as a cassette. Now you might be wondering, how does the cassette work if the Walkman itself is essentially the same size as the cassette? Well, stay tuned since we'll take a look at this machine, we'll see what it has to offer, and it also has a very special trick up its sleeve that actually makes it function. To get a basic idea of why this Walkman is significant, let's take a look at some other examples that were available, like this General Electric. Now this is the type of Walkman you could buy for a reduced price since it does have play, fast forward, and stop, but there is no rewind. This cassette mechanism doesn't even have a dedicated second spindle since it only needs to use the one because there is no reverse. There is also a volume control as well as the switch to switch between the tape mechanism or the actual radio. And there's also a tuning dial to adjust the frequencies. But that's pretty much it with this cassette player. And this one also takes 3 AA batteries. Now to take a look at the second Walkman here, this is a Sony TCM-37V. Now this specific player does have the ability to actually record, and this one also has rewind. Now this one is still a larger Walkman. This is the cassette, and if we actually compare the two side by side, this one does appear a bit taller, but that's mainly due to the belt clip here. This is also removable, but even without this, it's still quite a large player. Here's the cassette compared to the Walkman itself. Now this player does have extra circuitry to actually enable the recording feature, as well as VOR, voice operated recording, which basically means that it will only record once it actually detects audio. And there is also a battery LED. On the side, there are the controls as well as a pause switch. There's also the model number again. At the top, there's the headphone jack. And then there's also the VOR switch, as well as a built-in counter, which is handy to have on a model that actually records, as well as the volume control. And then on the side, there is also a DC input jack, a plug for an external microphone, and it also has a slot for 2 AA batteries. The bottom side, as we saw, has the model information as well as the diagram to put in the batteries. And on the back, this one does have a speaker. And the housing for it is actually a little bit larger on one half to actually compensate for the extra size that the speaker provides. And there's also some information about VOR itself, but that's basically it. And there's also some feet on it, so that way you can actually lay it down and use it as a recorder. As you can see, manufacturers were really not all that concerned about how much space the Walkman took up, but were actually concerned about how expensive these were to make, and they were pretty cheap, which is why they continued to make them like this, especially with having just a really basic mechanism. Since they were cheap, a lot of people bought these. But Sony, being the masters of miniaturization, were able to make this, and they continued to make this. The original one was released around 1983, and this one was released around 1985. So by this time, Sony had pretty much made the world's smallest Walkman, and they were continuing to make Walkmans like this simply because they were cheap to make. It's also why these are pretty unique to have even nowadays, because how many Walkman can say that they're the same size as a cassette? With that very basic explanation of the Walkman, let's actually take a look at this. So this specific model is WM-F10II, and this one does have its case. The housing of the Walkman itself is metal, and on the front here we have a window to see the Walkman itself as well as the radio frequencies. There's also a small little opening here to actually access the control for the radio. On the right side there is nothing here, but on the left side there is an opening for the headphone jack. On the top there are the controls listed, so you don't even have to take it out of the case. And on the back it just says Made in Japan. Taking the Walkman out of its case is extremely easy since you just open it. There's some Velcro that holds it down, and there it is. So as stated, this is a WM-F10II. There is just an F10 model, but this is the slightly newer version. You might be wondering, as stated before, it is the same size as a cassette, so how does it play it? We'll get to that real quick, but first let's take a look at the actual Walkman itself and see what kind of features it has to offer. So looking at the front, this is a plastic type of cover, but there is a battery LED indicator. It's a Sony sticker. The Walkman branding was FM and AM labeled. The direction that the tape is going. This is the option to select which band you want to listen to, whether it be FM and AM, and it even indicates with a color switch based on which one it is. This controls which band you want to select to, which station you want to tune in. On the side, there is a DC input for 1.5 volts, and it even shows you the polarity of the jack. The back shows you the model information again, as well as the Dolby information. On the other side, there's an option to select between normal and metal tape. That's also the option for Dolby noise reduction, and a switch to select between the radio or the tape. There's also a headphone jack, and on the top there's a wheel to adjust the volume, play, stop, fast forward, rewind. So apart from some marks on the plastic housing and a small little dent here, my Walkman is otherwise in pretty good condition, and this model is kind of hard to find. At least it functions, and it also has its case. How does it play the cassette? It slides up. It expands to actually take a cassette. Now this is one of the most interesting cassette designs because not many of the players do this. But Sony did this in order to make the Walkman as small as possible. So what happens when you try to put in a cassette when it's in the smaller state? Simply put, it just will not close. So you can still put in a cassette, you can try to close it, and it just won't work. You first have to open it, and now it actually works. The extension part doesn't really add any extra functionality. It mainly just has some stereo badging as well as the compartment for the battery itself. You just have to push open and it takes a single AA. Putting the cover back on is extremely easy, and it's a pretty interesting way to place the battery since it keeps the nice appearance of the aluminum housing. So to take a close look at the mechanism itself, it's essentially just some hinges that allow the tape door to open, and there's nothing really significant about the expanding motion of the player. It simply just slides open, and there's presumably something to hold it in place so that way it doesn't fully detach. And putting in a cassette is pretty standard, like most players. You simply just have to align it, and it closes. After that, there is no proper power switch. The only real switch to indicate what you're going to be using is the radio and tape switch, and most of the time, if you don't use it, it would be left on tape because that would otherwise drain the battery if it's left on the radio. Playing a tape is extremely easy. You just have to press play, and it begins playing. If you really wanted to, you can also play the tape with the door open, and then you can see the tape itself moving. You can also see the platters for the spindles. Since this is a clear cassette, fast forward and rewind are pretty basic. It just speeds it up. My unit isn't extremely perfect. It does have some interesting noises, but the belts have been replaced and it does work perfectly fine. There's no real issues with the audio quality. I do have a test tape that has been recorded with and without Dolby. I have Dolby B and C recorded separately, as well as a standard track, and now we'll just take a listen and see how it sounds. That is pretty much it for this video. Hopefully the test tape that I made helped to demonstrate what this Walkman can actually do. For a Walkman of this size especially, the amount of technology that Sony managed to put in here, it's actually a really nice unit. So if you guys enjoyed the video, then be sure to subscribe because there's a whole bunch of other cool tech content coming up. And if you guys want to, you can also join the Discord and the subreddit with links in the description down below. And thanks for watching.